meeting. And the first agenda item is public comment. If there's anybody in the waiting room, there's nobody in person. Is there anybody in the waiting room?
No raised hands.
Okay.
Do
Yeah.
we have somebody doing minutes? Or-
I'll take care of that.
We will have it recorded.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for checking on that. And we have a pretty full agenda, but the first agenda item is Christy Senatori from the commission. Thanks for coming on, Christy. I know you've got a lot on your plate, but appreciate you coming and giving us an update on what you're seeing and what's happening from the county level. And I think everybody knows who you are. Christy Senatori is the CEO of the Cape Cod Commission and is a great colleague on housing and environment and water and very knowledgeable staff. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I can just jump right in if
Yeah.
you'd like.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. That's great. I do have a handful of slides. I don't have a 60-page PowerPoint to share, but I do have some slides just to set the context of some of the work that we're doing, tailored it a little bit to Orleans. And I really thought it would be important to talk a little bit broadly about some of the demographic and economic data that we're seeing, what we're looking at in terms of the people of the region, talk a little bit about the place, and of course getting into some of our housing challenges and what we're doing with our regional housing strategy, and then pulling it back a little bit and talking big picture economics, and really that has to do with the infrastructure that we have here in the region, and a little bit of a focus on the canal bridges and an economic analysis that we're doing there. So if it's okay with you, I'm just going to share my screen briefly and we can go through those slides, and then feel free to stop me along the way. We can have a conversation, but I thought this might be helpful to at least set the context.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, let's see if I can do this here. All right, can you all see that?
Yes.
We can now. Yep.
Okay, great. So just really starting with a conversation about the people, the population. Obviously, we know our most recent census data indicates that there are about 229,000 people in the region. Orleans has about 6,300 people as of the latest census. The year-round population spread here, you can see those numbers across the Cape, with the higher numbers certainly being in the Mid-Cape area, the Upper Cape area, a little bit lower in the lower and the Outer Cape, with Orleans around that 6,300 year-round population number. And then we obviously have an aging population, with the region being about 54, 55 years old. Orleans being a little bit on the higher end, around 63 is about that median age. And you can see the range there. The lower and Outer Cape seems to have a little bit of an older population. Mid and Upper Cape seems to be a little bit on the younger side. We're increasing in demographic diversity. So from the last census in 2010 to the current census in 2020, we saw almost double the population percentage of non-white. And here you can see that spread, the entire county there at 14.2 on the right-hand side, compared to the rest of the state at about 30. And you can see the spread certainly between the Upper Cape, Mid-Cape, the Lower Cape, and then the Outer Cape. So Orleans is about 7.4%, and that's the percentage of non-white population. Total housing units, I'm sure you all know this information, but just as a reminder, the Cape has about 165 or so thousand housing units. Orleans just under 6,000. Again, you can see that spread throughout the 15 towns across the region. And then seasonal housing units, about 36% of the region, with Orleans coming in at about 47%. Certainly, again, that spread with the Outer Cape being the significantly higher in terms of that seasonal population, Bourne and Sandwich being much lower. Year-round rentals. So we're starting to get a better understanding, and I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with some of this data as well, but across the region, what do we have for a percentage of our housing stock that's year-round rentals? And this is, of course, based on the best available information that we do have. 16.2% of the region has year-round rentals. You can see Orleans a little bit higher. So certainly we'd love to dive into some details there around the accuracy of these numbers. And, if this feels like it's something that feels accurate to you, and something that feels like it's a number that represents the housing stock that you have, but these are the numbers we're working with currently. And then the number of short-term rentals, obviously this is playing into the discussion around our year-round housing supply. The Cape having just about 18,000 short-term rentals. These are registered short-term rentals, with Orleans coming in around just under 850. Again, you can see that spread really ranging. The Mid-Cape has a few more short-term rentals than perhaps some of the other areas. Provincetown coming in very high there as well. If we look at our employment industries, so this is for the entire county, we're looking at health services, retail trade, and accommodation and food services pretty similarly. Obviously, you can see the increase in jobs that we have during those summer months, and we are just about back to those pre-COVID numbers that we were seeing. And then if you look more specifically at Orleans, retail trade certainly coming in a bit higher for top industries, accommodation and food services similarly, health services coming in a bit lower than the regional averages that we're seeing. So if we look at median annual earnings across the Cape, we are a bit lower than the state. So the median annual earnings for Cape Cods for an individual about 45,000, the state of Massachusetts about 53,000, Orleans faring a little bit better with 58,000. But what you can see here is even across the Cape and certainly across the state, we are seeing that gender gap between male and female annual earnings, with Barnstable County gender gap amounting to about $12,000. I have to point that out. Of course, we're talking about housing inventory, lack of inventory, and the high prices that we've seen pre-COVID, about $450,000 for the median sales price for a single family home. Just as of December of last year, about $730,000. You can see the number of units available to the market for purchase in June of 2019, just over 2,000. In December, it was just about 400, and we're seeing that pretty reliably around that number currently. And then if we look at Orleans specifically, those numbers were a little bit higher pre-COVID at about just under $800,000 with about 88 homes on the market. Currently, it's at about 1.4 million for that median sales price for that point in time in December, with very few homes on the market in the town of Orleans. And you can see that spike in about April, May of 2022. That's certainly that high median sales price number at over 2 million. And the gap between housing prices and our wages is widening. So we're seeing those housing prices, and this is across the region, increased by about 64% since pre-COVID, but our weekly wages have only increased by about 24% during that same time frame. So those median sales prices increased at about 3 times the rate of our average weekly wages. So at the commission, and Elisa is serving on our Barnstable County Economic Development Council, we have an economic development strategy, and that Economic Development Council really guides the development of a new SEDS. So the SEDS cover that you see here is the current SEDS that we have, and it's expiring in June of this year. So we are currently underway with the development of a new comprehensive economic development strategy for Cape Cod. So what we've been spending some time working on is a draft vision and goals for the new plan. The draft vision really simply put is a strong and vibrant Cape Cod. So a region that supports a resilient year-round community with access to housing options, high quality business and employment opportunities, and thriving natural resources, building upon the historic and unique characteristics that have drawn people to the region for centuries. So this is really guiding the development of the new plan. We'll have a number of goals that will accompany the draft vision, and we'll then have a number of specific priority projects that will accompany those different goals. So these are the goals, the topics that we're going to be working within. I'm sure none of these surprise you, but as the plan is further developed, we would certainly love your input and love your participation in the planning process. And as we reach out to stakeholders and focus groups, if there's an opportunity for you to weigh in, we'd certainly appreciate that. So obviously, we've been spending a significant amount of time on the development of our regional housing strategy. It was put out in draft right before the end of 2023. We've now just closed our public comment period and we're finalizing the draft strategy itself. The draft has a number of guiding principles that really kind of helped us focus on creating a greater variety of housing. We know a significant number of housing, over 80%, is single family homes. So really looking at trying to develop additional types of housing choices for our year-round population, supporting not only our year-round population, but our seasonal workforce as well, and making sure that we not only address housing, but make sure that we're addressing the challenges that accompany it, such as wastewater infrastructure, climate change, broadband, and other planning and investments that are needed. So I'm not going to go through this in detail. The plan is on our website. We'd certainly take any feedback that you do have. We've closed the public comment period formally, but anything that you have that would be helpful for us to hear about from your perspective, we'd certainly welcome that. It has key takeaways also, some of these which I just kind of mentioned during the housing numbers, the single family homes. A household, in order to affordably purchase the median sales price single family home that we talked about, with that number being about over $730,000, a household needs to earn about $210,000. And we're actually anticipating that that number is going to be even increasing. We have worked with the Donahue Institute out of UMass to identify demands for housing in terms of supply numbers, and we're expecting that demand is projected to outpace supply by about 11,000 to 22,000 housing units by the year 2035. We know the state as a whole will be in demand for about 200,000 units, so this number these numbers appear to be fairly accurate for the Cape, but those are big numbers. Kind of tying this back a little bit to the data around the average short-term rentals and what we're seeing for rents across the Cape, it takes just about 2 months for the average short-term rents to exceed the average year-round rents. So certainly that gap that we're seeing is significant. And so looking at ways to incentivize the conversion to year-round is going to be important. And we're seeing 2 months as the average for Barnstable County, but in many of our communities and specifically in Provincetown, they're even seeing that this could be closer to 1 month. And then we did a comprehensive zoning analysis, and I know you're probably familiar with the zoning, obviously, in your town, but only 2% of the region actually allows housing developments with more than 2 units to be built by right. So we really need to take a look at the zoning across the Cape and identify areas that are appropriate for more multifamily housing. And so we've actually been able to do that, and we have local zoning recommendations for all 15 towns. These are in the plan as well. And I do have the ones for Orleans that I'll pull up in just a moment here. But the plan itself has a number of recommendations. Again, I'm not going to go through all these in detail. They're certainly in the plan and on our website. Happy to go into any of them in detail if you'd like, but a couple just that I'll pull out are obviously looking at changing zoning. That's going to be critical over the course of the next several months. Streamlining permitting. We're hearing from developers and abutters and proponents of projects and the general public that the permitting isn't necessarily predictable. So making this a bit easier to maneuver and understand the predictability of when permitting is happening is going to be important. And so there are a number of other recommendations within the plan that we will be working on. And then this is also going to require coordination with a lot of different organizations and entities across the Cape. There is a lot of great work being done by our housing advocacy organizations and by our communities, our 15 towns. And so we want to make sure that we are continuing to foster these collaborations and these partnerships so that we can move these recommendations forward in an expeditious manner. So this is what the local zoning recommendations look like. I know some of you are probably familiar with this, but we've been able to pull out local zoning recommendations for each of the 15 towns. We started the planning process meeting with all 15 towns with staff and in some cases board members. And then we wrapped up the process meeting with all 15 towns to make sure that these local zoning recommendations were aligned with the local goals, and making sure that the recommendations were something that were consistent with either the housing production plans or local comprehensive plans. And so in many cases, we're working already collaboratively to advance some of the recommendations around local zoning changes. And we look forward to working with all of the towns, and specifically with Orleans. I know you're already making progress on some of the changes and others as well. And so we look forward to continuing the dialogue. So the last couple slides are really just talking about the bridges. We know that those bridges were constructed in the 1930s. They were constructed for cars of the size from the 1930s, and those 2 lanes often feel like one when you're driving over the bridges. And when they were constructed, they were designed for traffic of less than 1 million crossings in the 1930s. We now have 38 million annual vehicle crossings over the 2 bridges. So certainly the traffic today far surpasses the design of those bridges. And they are the only vehicular roadway connections to the Cape. They serve our 8,600 businesses. There's 50,000 daily commuters coming over those 2 bridges, 5 million annual visitors, trucks that are coming over those bridges, and 122 daily school bus crossings over those bridges. So in some cases, our students are living on one side of the canal and go to school on the other side. And so there's a lot of traffic in terms of our school buses that are crossing those bridges on a daily basis. And so there certainly could be significant impacts if we do not replace these 2 bridges in terms of closures potentially needed for maintenance of these bridges. And so I'm sure many of you experienced the impacts that there were when we had the lane closures last year. The Sagamore Bridge had maintenance in the spring, and the Bourne Bridge had maintenance in the fall. And so if we are not successful in obtaining funding to replace one or both of these bridges, we could undergo what's known as a major rehabilitation. And this could be a potential closure, full closure of either bridge from anywhere from 4 to 6 months, and temporary lane closures for each bridge, which could be about 12 to 16 months. And so when we looked at the maintenance that happened last year with just temporary closures of only 53 days on the Sagamore Bridge and 46 days on the Bourne Bridge, there were significant travel time delay costs. Commuting flows were disrupted. We saw unpredictable regional travel times, and certainly those regional and local traffic patterns were disrupted. So we need to make sure that we are understanding what the potential impacts are of those potential closures if we were to see a full bridge closure. This could potentially cause an economic disruption to our region that could cause a significant time to recover from. So at the Commission, we are working with a consultant on an economic impact analysis to understand what a full closure would look like in terms of impacts to our economy. And some of the things that we're looking at are impacts to goods and services. We understand the cost of goods and services would certainly have an impact, not only the goods and services coming over the bridge, but on the exporting as well, looking at the local business impacts, looking at our visitation impacts, and those other impacts that are not as directly tied to the economy, but certainly would be critical to our emergency response, transportation for schools, municipal services for the town of Bourne and other communities. We thankfully have a really engaged federal and state delegation, and we believe we've already been successful and will likely be successful in phase 1 of the bridge replacement projects, and that's for the Sagamore Bridge. So it's likely that that's going to be moving forward, and hopefully in a time frame that works for the bridges themselves. But we need to make sure that we're also vigilant in applying for and making sure we're resourced to replace the Bourne Bridge as well. So this information that we'll be receiving over the course of the next several months on the economic impacts will help us advocate for the potential funding opportunities coming down the road. So all of the housing information is on our website here. We also have a lot of the canal information around the bridges. There's everything I shared and a lot more information on the bridges, the funding. And then we also have a lot of the demographic and economic information on our data site. So I didn't want to go into too much detail on any one particular item, but I wanted to at least give you enough information to kind of start the conversation and put it into a little bit of context, some of the work that we're doing at the commission. So I'm going to pause here, and I'm happy to take questions. And again, we look forward to engaging with you as we update the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, as well as other opportunities throughout the work that we're doing at the commission.
Thank you, Christy. A great presentation. You guys have a lot going on. There's a lot of detail, and I have a couple questions, but I can see a couple people here ready to get into the conversation. So do you want to go ahead?
I just have a quick question while we're on the subject of bridges. John Ostman, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
So I think the big question is, you talk about the major rehabilitation phase, if we get to that point, where we're looking at possible 4 to 6 months bridge closure. What's the time frame of funding a new bridge before that happens?
So it's a bit nuanced, and if the plan for the Sagamore Bridge goes forward and we actually are able to start construction within the next several years, we would eliminate the need for major rehabilitation for that bridge. The Bourne Bridge can continue with the maintenance that it's been undergoing, as far as I understand, and certainly I'm not an engineer or an expert in this, but how we're understanding it is that the major rehabilitation could potentially be delayed if continued maintenance happens, and there's a plan to replace that bridge in the next several years. So we're, kind of working through that strategy to make sure that the funding for the replacement of both bridges is expeditious. We don't want to see a major rehabilitation of either bridge, but we would need to be armed with the right economic data and information so that if there is one, we know what that's going to mean to our region.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Please.
I don't know, Steve, Judy, Peter, anybody? So I guess the question I have on the bridges is there anything that we can do, that either requesting our select board or as an economic development committee, to help move funding or move support along?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think at the moment there is momentum to get that funding for the first bridge. We will want to make sure that we're working with our federal and state delegation and the administration to fund that second bridge. So we want to make sure that there's enough advocacy around that. Once we have our data and information from our consultant on the economic analysis, I'd be happy to share that with you. And then we can have a more widespread discussion around how we can best support some of the advocacy efforts around supporting the replacement of that second bridge.
Yeah, I'm not sure that people on the lower and outer Cape really think about the bridge as much as we think about it on the upper and mid Cape, where a lot of our employees are coming over the bridge, and wonder about collecting that data about kind of anticipation of what kind of prep employers are going to make with their employees. Are they going to have to pay them more, pay gas differential, start recruiting? I had a lot of employees that were just not willing to continue to sit in traffic. So in terms
Right.
in terms of data, and I don't know if we think about it here in the same way or have that same sense of urgency in the lower outer Cape. Judy, do you hear?
I think that the number one employer that's going to be impacted by this is probably the school system.
Yep.
They have a lot of, I don't know what the percentage was.
Yeah.
Years ago, the percentage was like 12% lived off Cape.
Right. Interesting. So anyway, however we can help, let us know, either through Michael or through me or whatever. One of my other questions was on the topology of housing in Orleans. That 20% year-round rentals kind of makes sense. I would want to do a little bit of math, but we invested in affordable housing and apartments specifically years ago, right? So we're right near or at our 10%. So it could make sense that we're at our 20,000, I guess. Do you have a way to tell how many are apartments versus single-family homes? Is there a way to like do a breakdown, or even apartments versus single-family homes in our town overall, and how that compares to other towns?
We have a housing typology for each of the towns, and so we could tell you how many types of multifamily housing that you have, whether they're townhomes or condos or apartments or
Yeah.
the different types of typologies, single-family homes. And I can take a look and see whether we can break that down by ownership or rental. I imagine there's a way that we can do that.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting, especially as we are considering other housing projects, or, you know, now that we're at our 10%, what is the AMI that we're looking for, and what kind of housing do we need to try to create? I think that we have a different topology than other towns, but that's just my, intuition. It's not based on like real numbers, and it would be great to have that. Judy?
Definitely. The housing typology that we have created for all 15 towns is on our website too. So if you want to take a look
Okay.
at that, and I'll take a look and see how we can break that down by rental versus ownership.
Yeah, thank you. Judy?
The question or a comment, because I don't know that anyone here would have an answer. Did the 847 short-term rental number in Orleans make anyone pause? I think that's pretty low. Is that a reporting problem? Is that
Oh, you think it's too low?
847 for short-term rentals with an influx of visitors in the summertime? It just doesn't, the math doesn't work in my head, but that's why I'm asking the question to,
Well, I guess I wonder, so Christy, because it does, like when even just walking around my neighborhood, I see,
Right.
certain company signs all over the place on every homes. Are they considered, but I know the owners also go there, sometimes. So how is it counted?
So what we're basing that number on is the Department of Revenue short-term rentals registration from 2023. So that's a direct report from the DOR. And so that captures everything that's been registered.
and I hear the hesitation in your voice. The key word in there is registered.
That's the best available information we have in order to kind of make that reporting based on
Right.
actual reported
Yeah.
information.
Thank you. Something.
Andrea? Hi.
Just to add to Judy's concern, remember our registration of short-term rentals locally, began in January. So to Judy's point, our numbers should be improving this year because it'll be aided by the state count, which is also what Orleans uses.
Improving in terms of
I don't know
accuracy.
what that means.
In terms of
Yes.
accuracy, the numbers would
Yes.
be more accurate because there's a state
Yes.
registration. You're not relying on a town registration, you're not relying on the state, which can get kind of wonky in how it determines and counts.
And it
Households.
may take time for everybody to be aware of that
Catch up.
registration, get
Yeah.
on board, but our numbers will only improve.
Will improve meaning more accurate.
Yes.
Yeah. Not improve in terms of like the number
No,
of.
no, 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 no. We're going to make those numbers change,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Do you have anything else you want to, I see, yeah, okay. Steve, anybody